Okay, and part two. So the first question when we think about part two is why two parts? There's a practical reason, which is that it was already a very long poem as it is, but there are poems that are much longer. He could have written it as one. And there's a simple answer, which is too simple, which is that part one is like um, a traditional myth with a comic ending, and then part two is the tragic part. Um, I think that's too simplistic because we did find tragic features in part one. I think what it does is it sets up something which part two then takes down. But you could just read part one and think, oh, this is a nice myth about how um, a god comes down and decides to live with humans, but it also has like a double edge to do with the moral. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Um, one thing I didn't mention at the start of part one, you've got um, Hermes from Olympus High had stolen light. So that might be a reference to Prometheus, who stole fire from Olympus. Why did he steal it? So he could um, give it to people, and people therefore formed culture. But then it's like a double-edged thing. Was he wrong to do it? In the case of Hermes, he seems to be doing it for selfish reasons. But in the case of Lamia, she's bringing down a sort of uh, godly fire to bring life to Lysias, who otherwise was living this fairly um, shallow life of an ordinary young man into um, races and work chat and that sort of thing. So, really looking at this as a structural decision is helpful. The other thing which I think is really interesting is we finish part one. Obviously, no reader is going to then go and pick up part two again. So there's a gap. And what that gap does potentially is leave that bit in the middle up to our imagination. And of course, imagination is so valued by Keats and the Romantic poets. At the end of part one, it talks about how this this omniscient narrator um, who we're following, is almost like a spy that's come down from the fairy kingdom and is spying on them and is sort of disturbing their solitude. So perhaps in this bit between the two poems, we can imagine a kind of perfection where they are undisturbed. And by continuing to read, we're then disturbing it. They will no longer be suspended in imagination. We now shine a light on it, and that doesn't have to be a negative thing. Um, there are other Keats poems which are very much about just the whole poem is itself imaginative and flies up. Ode to a Nightingale is all about losing yourself in poetry, but then there is some poetry which is very much about um, disrupting and kind of rationally deconstructing. And we know that Lamia and Lysias wanted to be left alone. So by us having this part two, it's almost like we don't want there to be a part two because it said in part one that we were disturbing and they were happy when they weren't disturbed. So that in itself is a sort of, by reading, we're contradicting their desire. So that's an interesting structural thing as well. The other thing that two parts does is it invites us to compare the two parts. We can look at, okay, what's changed? I highlighted the first line of part one. Upon the time before the fairy broods drove nymph and satyr from the prosperous woods, love in a hut with water and crust is love, forgive us, cinders, ashes, dust. Very different. So we're in a new setting. We're not in this purely imaginative setting. This is very much homely. These are things that we find at home. These are very earthly things. love in a hut, and that's really all the setting we get. Whereas in the first poem, we get all of this build up to do with it, um, like if you remember over here, the cow-slipped lawns, and you've got all of these colours of um, gold, and you have all of these wondrous creatures, love in a hut. So there is some of that early richness that has been lost, but has it been lost to them? What are we to make of that? So what the poem does at the start is, in a way, gets us to evaluate, well, Lamia has left behind all of these things. What has she got instead? And again, this is less of a flowing, natural rhythm. There are sections which are still um, dreamlike, where the meter is very much flowing, but there are also already um, interruptions. Love in a hut with water and crust is love. Forgive us, cinders, ashes, dust. Now, his tone here is quite cynical, actually. Love in a palace is perhaps at last more grievous torment than a hermit's fast. So, love is a grievous torment. That's a very cynical thing to say. That so he's got this capital L, so he's personifying love. We might think of Cupid from earlier in the poem, but love is asking love for forgiveness. And why is this? Because for some reason, love in a palace is more grievous, it's more torment, or it's harder. So I read it one of two ways. He's either saying it's easier to stay in love if things stay simple. So if you stay with all of these ordinary human things like water and crust, then that will be better. But that's kind of undermined, because cinders, ashes, and dust are imagery of it being reduced to nothing. So if you've just got water and crust, then you've got nothing. So what is there? It's almost like there isn't enough for love. We need to ask love for forgiveness for not having good enough things for it. Love in a palace is more grievous torment. But why? Because there's more stuff to worry about. Maybe it's because we're getting distracted. The separate meaning, which is totally separate, is that maybe torment is necessary for there to be love. That's, again, cynical, but it's something that we've been very much looking at with Keats. It's this Lacanian idea in terms of love and the objet, that we create these obstacles for ourselves, and the suffering is part of the love. Does that mean that it's bad and we shouldn't feel love? Negative capability? No, it does not mean that. We should feel these painful things, but that doesn't make them less painful. So there's something tragic about the very nature of love. There's something doomed about love itself. And within Aristotle's definition of tragedy, you've got the sense that the themes or the ideas covered in the tragedy apply to our world. We ourselves can relate to them. So there's this generalization that happens, where we can relate the drama on stage with a wider experience of our own lives. So it's doing that quite well. This is a doubtful tale from fairyland, hard for the non-elect to understand. So after this reflection, which we can kind of relate to, it then says this tale seems doubtful. We ourselves have to suspend our disbelief. Non-elect, those who are not used to the ways of the fairyland, might seem weird, but there is this thing that we can connect to, which is to do with the nature of love. Had Lycius lived to hand his story down, he might have given the moral fresh frown. So it's hard to understand what the moral is, and there is this ambiguity. So again, is it saying a hut isn't good enough for love? Is it saying living in a hut is what's needed and you shouldn't want more? Is it saying love will die if you're just sort of happy in a hut? You need conflict. We're not sure what the moral is, and maybe if Lysias, who's the mortal like us, had lived, then he'd be able to give it a second thought. But it doesn't say second thought. Fresh frown. So thinking about it too much would give a frown. It would be something which is actually negative. You also frown when, again, you're sort of cynical or skeptical about something. But the significant thing is, had Lysias lived to hand his story down, so Shakespeare style, the chorus or the omniscient narrator flags up that he's going to die right at the start. So if we treat this as a separate standalone piece, and as in Isabella, it begins by telling us the main character is going to die. And that places a sort of doom over him. If you want to know the technical term for that, it's prolepsis. So Macbeth actually lived with a sense of prolepsis because the witches had told him what was going to happen. Whereas here, we, the audience, have the prolepsis, but Lysias hasn't yet had the chance to develop this frown and to reflect on it. So yeah, we are more cynical than he is. Or clenched it quite, but too short was their bliss. So we're told that it was too short. So if we're judging this and thinking, okay, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? There's little clues that the narrator's giving that we ought to judge this as something that we want them to feel. And that for both of them it's bliss, and that we should therefore feel happy for them. And of course, this idea of bliss being too short is throughout all of Keats, and in some ways it's through the other tragedies we looked at as well, with Willie as well, as this sense of capturing a moment and the fleeting nature of happiness, that you sort of want to hold on to these fleeting moments and then you wish that you could grab it, but happiness is always inevitable, will fly away. Love, jealous grown of so complete a pair. So they are in this harmonious romantic relationship. It's in the nature of love that love's going to grow jealous. Now that's kind of weird. Again, cynical. Again, it's personifying love. Weird to think of love as growing jealous because Cupid is this angel meant to be perfect. People fall in love. They're happy. Love is jealous. That is something that happens in Greek myths. Gods do feel jealous. So that's not too weird for that convention, but it is weird in terms of our understanding of the gods and these kind of ideas. And certainly love, it's weird to think of love, the personification of love itself is containing jealousy. So maybe love always involves jealousy. Of course, Othello, we're not going to make the comparison, that's certainly clear there. And we had the early image of love as Cupid, and okay, hovered and buzzed. Now, that's similar, but it's slightly different. Because if you're buzzing, then you're not just sort of gracefully floating. It's this sort of quite violent, aggressive, high energy gesture. So it's almost like Cupid has turned into this more bee-like creature with a fearful roar as well. So it's quite monstrous, actually, that love has been transformed in this way. Okay, so we're not going to look at everything. For all this came a ruin side by side. So side by side with joy comes ruin. They were enthroned in the eventide upon a couch near to a curtaining, whose airy texture from a golden string floated into the room and let appear, unveiled the summer heaven, blue and clear. So this airy texture and lots of the imagery in the poem highlights how ethereal it is. So it's insubstantial and temporary, their situation. And this is shown through the setting. The nature of their condition is temporary because the setting itself is airy. might disappear at any moment, is fragile. And these sorts of things are being highlighted with the imagery of the setting. And it's also ambiguous. So which are they in? Are they in a hut or are they in a palace? It said at the start this kind of contradiction between the two to do with love there, but we weren't clear which we should prefer or which they were in. And it seems like maybe they're in a hut, but then maybe Lamia is creating these extra things here as well. Okay. And then very quickly, as soon as this introduction has happened, deafening the swallow's twitter came a thrill of trumpets. So there's birdsong outside. It's disturbed by trumpets. Lysias started. So he sort of pulled out of this dream state by the sound of trumpets. Of course, birdsong, it's all to do with like harmony, peace, beauty, what we want more of, nice pastoral harmony, disturbed by trumpets. What are those trumpets? So we had some trumpets in Isabella. They were a sign of the party. Perhaps trumpets are society. They're the wider social world. Romantics really treasured solitude, being your own individual, didn't like all of this busyness. They were more kind of introverted. So trumpets also like, it's not just social, but it's sort of pomp. So it's for show. It's for things like festivals, parties, war. It's all of these kind of things that we construct that aren't kind of direct expressions of our emotions, but are like artificial. And so he's reminded by society. And of course, he was someone who used to hear trumpets at the start of a chariot race. So you might remember the stuff he used to like before. It left a fort, a buzzing in his head. So buzzing again, maybe that's that jealous Cupid intentionally disturbing their heaven. And this state of Eden is now disturbed. And if the two of them are in a state of Eden, then, well, is she the snake? We'll come back to that in a second, because it seems like they're Adam and Eve. Remember, Eve is also a temptress. Eve tempted Adam and is responsible for their fall. So even if you say she's responsible, it doesn't mean that she's the devil. She could still have this Eve role. In the poem, a purple-lined palace of sweet sin, so highlighting the sin part of it. We'll come back to the sin in a second. Purple line, so rich. It's highlighting the riches that she left behind in some ways, but she's able to, through their love, sort of, it seems like their love is generating all of this extra richness, which is entirely in their imagination, but nonetheless, here it is, very rich. So into the noisy world, almost forsworn. His spirit passed beyond its golden bourne into the noisy world, almost forsworn. So suddenly he escapes his peace into the noisy world. His thoughts go outside of their little hut, out into the world, and he thinks of the world outside. Saw this with pain, so arguing a want of something more than her empery of joys. And she began to moan and sigh. So she realized that he's no longer satisfied with what they have together. He's growing bored. And that itself is interesting, because what we have is this idea at the start that if you are in a relationship for a long time, if you're in love for a long time, then you start to have this fresh frown. You start to be rational about love. And then too short was their bliss. So, okay, it's too short. It's a bad thing. But it was also too short to breed distrust and hate. So Keats is saying, if you're in love for too long, then it sours. The love goes away. You start to distrust and hate each other. So they don't have time for that. So maybe that's not a tragic thing. Maybe it's a good thing. Well, it could be a good thing and a tragic thing, which is probably more the case. And all of this, highlighting the ethereal nature. And then why does he want more? He starts to want more. What could he possibly want? Because he mused beyond her, knowing well that but a moment's thought is passion's passing bell. So thought is a passing bell, this alliteration of a bell sound. Yeah, it's like thinking is like a bell that wakes you up or summons you to something. Um, why do you sigh, fair creature, whispered he? Why do you think? Returned she tenderly. I like the double meaning there. Um, and also, like, yeah, she wants him not to think about this too much. And it's a sweet relationship. We get a real insight into their dynamic in a way that we don't in other poems. Even in the ones where the characters are sort of straightforwardly goodies, like we never get into Madeline's soul to see how she's feeling about all of these things that are going on. So, in a way, because Keats chooses to share her thoughts in this direct way and her feelings through the subtle, nuanced dynamics between them, it's more tragic because we are given more time to connect with the characters. So, but she's a lying, evil snake thing, so maybe it's all a show. Maybe we shouldn't connect with her. You have deserted me. Where am I now? Not in your heart while care weighs on your brow. No, no, you have dismissed me, and I go from your breast, houseless. It must be so. So it seems very authentic. It seems like something that um, a woman in a relationship would say. Um, this cynicism, Keats is in a situation where probably his lover is even like going on other dates because she knows she can't marry him. He's too poor. There's this danger of tuberculosis. So we're not going to make the connection to biography, to Keats' personal life, unless we're really stuck for context. But what we do have for context is in the Romantic period more of an insight into the ordinary nature of relationships. So this isn't being idealized. It's not like this perfect woman who is really subtle and wise and just laughs at everything, and then a dragon comes and takes her or something. It's interesting that they are multi-dimensional. They're again ambiguous, and one thing that the ambiguity is doing is it's making them more realistic. Because even Aristotle did say that you have to have characters that are the good guys, the tragic heroes are flawed as well, because that does make them more realistic, makes us connect with them more. You have just dismissed me, and I go from your breast, houseless. I must be so. He answered, bending to open eye. So while I am striving to fill my heart with deepest crimson and to double smart, how to entangle, trammel, and snare your soul and mind, labyrinth, you there. That's a very Lacanian thing to say. While I strive how to fill my heart with deeper crimson. So he got what he wanted, but he wanted it. It's always not that. And there's a sense of wanting to make it the object that he wants. So there's a sort of, he wants to ensnare, and maybe he's sort of naive to say this out loud, but he tells her, or maybe, yeah, again, shows how honest he is, how direct he is, how close they are. I want to entangle and snare your soul and mind. But also maybe that's how love feels. So again, he's not romanticizing love in the sense of making it this totally abstract thing. He wants to be realistic. This actually is love. And when you're in love, you do kind of want to be like almost trapping the other person. And maybe love does have that kind of weird other controlling underside where you constantly need this sort of reassurance, where you want to feel this sort of control, which again makes it more universal and generalizable. Your soul and mine, like the hid scent in an unbudded rose, I, a sweet kiss, you see your mighty woes. So she kisses him at this point, obviously hoping to stop these thoughts. What a mortal hath a prize that other men may be confounded and abashed withal. So when she kisses him, he carries on his string of thoughts, and he refers to her as a prize. And we had the contrast in Isabella between the brothers who saw everything as, in terms of wealth, how can they sell it? What's it worth? They saw Isabella as worth more from a like social wealth status point of view. He refers to her as a prize, and it's again this sort of um, adolescent sort of desire, but he basically wants to show her off to his mates. So the trumpets got him thinking about the world outside, his friends. She knows he wants to show her off. So in a way, that's nice. He thinks she's worth showing off, but this state of like Garden of Eden separated from the rest of the world is obviously being undermined by that, and he's kind of evaluating her in a way which isn't just pure emotion. To call her a prize requires a sort of evaluation rather than being enthralled. So she kisses him. That's all she's doing at the moment. We'll come back to that. That my first choke. So he's being like showing lots of pride, which is a vice. It's if we're going down the tragic flaw route, which is quite reductive, it does seem like he's showing this tragic flaw of pride, or you could even say hubris. Perverse with stronger fancy to reclaim her wild and timid nature, to his aim, beside for all his love, in self-despite. So he has these contradictory feelings in self-despite, this thing going on. Against his better self he took delight luxurious. His sorrows soft and new, his passion cruel, took on a hue. So this is a transition. So by him changing in this way, him transitioning, it adds drama, which makes us feel more pity for her, or it might make us think, oh, but actually she's got him in the situation that he thinks he has her because she kind of has him under her spell. So it's kind of ironic in that way. Apollo's presence when in act to strike the serpent, the serpent, Circe, she was none. Funny little line there. So whereas at the start we're sort of caught up in the imagery, the voice of the narrator starts to interrupt a bit more and give us more judgment of what we should be thinking and feeling about this. And just like the omniscient narrator says something and then thinks about it, it's like, haha, I said serpent. Apollo defeats a serpent. Obviously, Apollonius will defeat her, but it's also this kind of joke. The serpent, the serpent. So there is something funny about their situation, and he describes their situation as funny at the end of the first part. But there's this something funny at the same time as something tragic about it, as again there often is in Keats. So we have this association, like the brothers and like lots of Keats poems, men seem to be more materialistic and rational. Women are more willing to be imaginative, caught up in feelings. And here he is wanting her as a prize. And now we've got this, he wants to strike her like a serpent. The serpent sees she was none. Now, what could that mean? It could mean, that's again kind of restating that she was nothing, she was just a serpent. But it could mean she is no longer a serpent. That isn't what she is anymore. That was her form, but she changed it, and she changed it for him. If we want to go down the line of actually, no, she really did leave behind everything for him. What she could do at this point is what she did at the start, which is to make him go into a trance. So he suddenly forgets all of this, like La Belle Dame sans Merci did. She doesn't do that. At no point does she actually manipulate him. So she tries, but she tries in a way that a normal woman would. She tries to kiss him. She just cries. She tries to beg him. None of this is evil succubus strategy. She's not sucking the soul or the life out of him. He's suddenly full of this energy and life. Um, and she burned, she loved the tyranny. Um, she seems to kind of enjoy the fact that she's now powerless. She's no longer this goddess who can just change everything. And again, he's saying, like, it's this weird psychological thing about the nature of love, that it's within love, you sort of enjoy the um, domination of love. And there is this often violent undertone in Keats talking about passion and love. Um, but it's also what was said at the start, that in a way, she too actually wanted the conflict, wanted the drama in order to keep the love alive. And all subdued, consented to the hour and to the bridal he should lead his paramour. Um, so eventually she agrees. Oh, where's, I don't know if I missed this bit. Okay, so down there. Okay. She, I mean, she's not exactly happy about it. She's just doing what he wants. I've not asked it, even thinking the not mortal but of heavenly potency. So it's interesting that he again sort of sees through the fact that she's not mortal. He says it out loud. So is he in such a trance? Is he just choosing to ignore these aspects of her as he did at the start? Okay. And then to share a marriage feast and nuptial mirth, he's really caught up in this fantasy of how he's going to show her off and how great the wedding will be. I have no friends, said Lamia. No, not one. And this breaks the meter. He's caught up in all of this, and then that is a tragic line. Like, that is really sad, isn't it? We're suddenly reminded, oh yeah, she has no one. My presence in White Corinth hardly known. I have no friends, said Lamia. No, not one. That's really like genuine. It's interrupting his fantasy and kind of pompousness. Nuptial mirth with really simple language make us think how alone she is, because where's she going to go if he decides he doesn't want her? She really has no one in the world. So when he asks her, like, who are you going to invite? It shows the huge sudden difference that's appeared between them. They were so balanced and united, and suddenly there's this big gulf that he's this popular guy around Corinth, and she is all alone. Um, all of her race are dead, save me, and I neglect the holy rites for thee, even as you invite your many guests. So, holy rite, holy, like it's like a ritual tradition. So it could be that I'm not completely sure what she's referring to specifically, but she's just talked about the fact that all of her no incense burns. Okay, so that's what it is. So her, not only are her parents' bones in dusty urns, and she can't, like, she's not able to have a funeral. She's not able to respect her family, which is sad. Obviously, whatever happens is horrible. Let's put her in the state she's in right now. She's not able to perform that holy rite of giving them a proper burial or proper respect to mark them. But holy rite means something else, because even as you invite your many guests, and I neglect the holy rite for thee. The other type of holy rite there is that when you get married, you're allowed to have sex. Why are they living in sin? It's because she's saying, well, why do you want to get married? We're already having sex. So controversial, although very widespread in Keats's time, but that's obviously a conversation that many young couples would have had. But nonetheless, there you are inviting your guests, and I can't stop you. Just please keep Apollonius from me. And of course, this is introduced, it's set up, it's like a little prop. Um, we've already been introduced to Apollonius later. She just mentions this one detail, and of course, as readers, we know that this is the one thing that's going to happen. We already know that they're doomed, so here we're given a bit of foreshadowing as to the nature of the doom. It was the custom then to bring away the bride from home at blushing shut of day, veiled in the chariot, heralded along by strewn flowers, torched and married song. So the custom in Corinth was that when someone proposes, the bride is taken away, and she has this. Everyone celebrate the fact that she's getting married, and there's pageants. She's hanging out with her friends, her family. Everyone throws a celebration. But this fair unknown had not a friend, so being left alone, Lysias was gone to summon all his kin. Instead of even having a break and being able to talk to anyone about what's happening, to get advice, to connect, she's left all alone. Again, big contrast in brackets. Lysias does go home and wants to go and tell everyone. She's left all alone because she has no one. Knowing surely she could never win his foolish heart from this mad pompousness, she set herself high-thoughted how to dress misery and fit magnificence. Again, is it just we don't really have to analyze it too much because it's just directly such a tragic thought that she knew it was pointless trying to change his mind. So all she could think is, how am I going to cover up how upset I am about this? How to dress the misery means, how am I going to cover up how I really feel, but also how am I going to dress up this misery in with a striking enough costume, let's say, in order to hide my pain. So it's sad from that point of view, but it's also sad because we remember, okay, she already was kind of dressed up. It might make a bit more sense of that earlier weird description of her. So that really weird form that she was in before of being zebra striped and spotted like a pard, maybe actually that is the extent to which she had to go as a representation of the extent to which she felt pain and wanted to cover up that misery. Okay, so she did so, and then we have all of this build-up where line after line, she builds up this luxurious palace-like setting. This is obviously before Disney, but I said it's a bit like a Disney princess type of magical. She's again trying to recreate the magic, the wonder of the fairyland. He's off in the social world. What does she have? She has her memories of the fairy world. She tries to use all of her powers to create these. So it's teeming with odors. Why is she doing this? I think the tragic answer is really, well, what does she have to gain? She doesn't want this. She's doing this for him. And I think that's in itself is really tragic. You could go a bit more cynical and saying she's doing this to distract from the fact that she's a snake, or like a demon thing. But it does seem, so there's all of this build up. And of course, why is this build up? It goes up to a peak, what's called, it's built into a denouement, which is the point before the fall. Building all of this up because, of course, it's going to be destroyed. So Apollonius laughing now is kind of to us like an evil laugh. It's unpleasant. His patient thoughts had now begun to thaw and solve and melt. So suddenly it's like this thing that's rising to life, which is his thought, almost like the thought is itself a fire or a demon. Lysias is kind of like go away. We see another side of him. In a way, again, it's showing he still wants to look out for Lamia. She asked him not to invite him. He's saying, you're not supposed to force yourself here. So he's very kind of open, but then he's like, decides, no, I actually have to be courteous. Don't want to embarrass myself. I need to do what the custom is. So he falls into social courtesy and tries to, sweet talk him, so that sophist's spleen, he's a sophist, he's a thinker, and his spleen is his irritation, so he tries to turn it around. Also, sophist's spleen is this iteration, this sibilance of the S sound, so he is a sophist, lots of S's. He himself is snake-like, and later we have his lidless eyes, lidless like a snake. Maybe it's he who is the real snake. And we've got these along the mirrored walls, so twin clouds, there's odors, lots of this sense that this is all ethereal, this is all temporary, and also it's imaginative. It's also making us feel admiration for Lamia, because she created all of this. She is this talent, she has this imagination, and all of this is going to be ruined and undermined by this guy who thinks he knows better. Okay, and they're going to get more and more drunk. They have this music, they're consumed. They're referred to as beautiful slaves, which I like. And they're caught up in this, like beautiful slaves. And of course, this idea of the beauty of being enslaved in these joys, whether it be wine or love or music, that she's created for them. Where's the tongue? Oops. Not this one. Okay. So the wine came from the gloomy tun with merry shine. So the wine is again this like imagery for enjoyment, but it's also like, I like this imagery because of its metaphorical potential, that from the gloomy tun, so the tun is like this bottle that's not transparent, and from this gloomy tun with merry shine, so it's from the darkness, the wine has a merry shine, but inside it's dark. And this really is what Lamia is like. So she might be shining and merry and bright, but inside she's gloomy, and yet here she is pouring herself out for everyone's enjoyment. Okay. What reef for Lamia? I mean, you could look at that bit, and the reefs, the different types of tree symbolizing different things. Her one is a leaf of willow and adder's tongue. So obviously adder reminds us of the snake past, but the willow comes first. Willow to do with crying. Her past as an adder was all to do with, well, she wasn't that particular snake, but obviously is allusion to her snake form, is matched with crying. It's not matched with something sinister, but with this feminine image of tears, which we'll later actually see in the fellow as well. And this bit, which is really useful for all Keats poems: do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy, and there was an awful rainbow once in heaven. We know her woof, her texture she is given in the dull catalogue of common things. So when you split a rainbow into what it is, you find it in a book, like which is what scientists were doing. They were explaining what a rainbow is, and you unweave it. It stops being beautiful because you're thinking too much about it. And there's lots of point in this poem where we get the sense that by overthinking it, he's spoiling it. So conquer all mysteries by rule and line. So that's a very Enlightenment kind of thing to do. That it's like, no, I'm going to dominate this. It's also very like alpha male kind of um, explorer or warrior, and empty the haunted air and gnomon mine. Um, so haunted has the double meaning. It could be like ghosts are bad, you want it to not be haunted. But when you are emptying haunted air, it's sort of for nothing. Why are you attacking the air? It was something which was just sort of imagination. And haunted meaning like the imaginative thoughts. And no mind, a mind is usually something that's full of treasure. Why are you just emptying it? That itself is kind of quite tragic, but it's sort of part of human nature. This is what happens, especially kind of the archetypical male, Enlightenment male human nature. By her glad Lysias sitting in chief place. So she wants him to sit at the head of the table next to her, and she's sort of glad that he's there. And again is nice. Till checking his love trance, a cup he took, full brimmed and opposite, sent forth a look. So do you remember he said he wants to fill his heart? So again, it's this image of the heart like a bottle, like this translucent, so opaque bottle is the image of the heart, and she's filled it to the brim, full brimmed. So finally, she's worked her heart out to give him everything he wants, but of course, being given everything he wants is not what he wants. So it's full brimmed. She's really happy. Finally, there he is sitting next to her. What a great opportunity to bend over to turn to her and kiss her, to say thank you, to tell her he loves her. She checks where he's looking. He's looking opposite. He's not even looking at her. And that is a level of detail that we often haven't had in Keats, but it's a really human gesture, even though this is a very inhuman setup, but in a way that makes it more human. The fact that these are not humans in a way kind of makes it more symbolic and therefore somehow more direct and human than if these were just a normal couple. Makes it somehow more generalizable and infinite. And the poor philosopher fixed his eyes on her. There's a kind of violence on it. You fix a crossbow on someone. It's obviously troubling her. Of course, if someone's like staring at you in an unpleasant way, you would do. Of a natural heat shot his heart. Lamia, what does this mean? So she's obviously really uncomfortable, and there was no recognition in those orbs. Suddenly her eyes go out, and we have this Lamia shrieked, and nothing but the shriek with its sad echo did the silence break. Begone foul dream, he cried, gazing again, but of course he's chosen to come out of the dream worlds to have this reality. There is nowhere to escape. She's gone. Lamia no longer fair, there sat a deadly white. Shut those juggling eyes, thou ruthless man. And she's horribly looking at him like corpse-like. So this grotesque image at the end. Lots of imagery to do with blindness. Full, repeated he, while his eyes sat relenting. So I have preserved thee to this day. So has he now saved Lysias? Is this lucky that he's been able to see the reality? Um, and shall I see thee made a serpent's prey? Maybe she would have sucked all the life out of him. He would have died horribly, and he's Apollonius is doing him a favour. Keen, cruel, urgent, stinging. She as well, as a weak hand, could any meaning tell, motion him to be silent, vainly so. He looked again a level. No, a serpent echo he no sooner said than with a frightful scream she vanished. So even her ghost form now disappears as he names what she is, like unweaving the rainbow. As if his limbs of life from that same night on that couch he lay, his friends came round, supported him, no pulse or breath they found, and in his marriage robe, the heavy body wound. He has no life left in him. We're not sure if he kills himself, same as we're not sure at the end of Isabella if she kills herself, but there's no love, there's no life. Um, and that's the tragic end. So yeah, it's ambiguous, it's complicated, and we are just interested in it in terms of what makes it tragic. So don't be overwhelmed by passages you don't understand or trying to juggle all of it. Just need to pick out key sections.